Warm welcome from Berlin, Germany. My name is Daniel Stecher, and I'm very much delighted to have you all with us today for the very last Airline Crewing Enigma session of 2025. Last month, we had a flight attendant from Spirit Airlines, and today we have David Good, an airline pilot, who is talking about changing the system where the aviation industry needs a human factor revolution. And so I got to know David via LinkedIn conversation. We chit-chat a bit about the industry in general and what I was hearing from him. Thought that is maybe something also the airline crewing and operations Enigma should learn from him. So that's why stage is yours, David, and
Okay.
I will help you if there are questions from the audience. Please, everybody, raise your hand via the push button or just scream in. And then I think David wants to have a very dynamic conversation with everybody here in the call. Stage is yours.
Okay, very good. My name's David Good. I'm airline transport pilot and aircraft dispatcher. I've done both jobs. I've also been a manager of an OCC for Global Crossing Airlines, Global X, out of Miami during its certification process. I helped train dispatchers, crew schedulers. I was also duty manager for PSA Airlines, the American Airlines wholly owned regional based out of Dayton, and ran their OCC during some of the most trying operations just prior to COVID. What I'd like to talk about today is something that I think is a glaring issue inside what Daniel was talking about, the airline crewing enigma. And that is, we've kind of forgotten that the biggest problem isn't so much the technology exactly, it's the people. If we start putting our people first and making our technology support the people, then we will, I think, achieve a much better success rate than we're doing. Daniel is very clear in showing how many operations our people are having to deal with, point and click to put 5 different systems together to work in one general direction when the technology is available and I think is coming faster than we all realize, to use one piece of technology that connects all facets of the airline operation, streamlines everything, and lets the technology do the levering. I have a general idea of what that looks like, and essentially it's a triumvirate of AI, if you will. We know that AI is going to be a tool that we're going to be using in what we consider modern airline operations. It's just too powerful a tool to just leave off to the side. Now, is it coming for your job? I don't think so. I think what AI is there to do is to handle what I call predictive analysis. It's there to catch all the pieces that we have to do manually that creates the greatest levels of stress. I know in my career, it's, the plane swaps, the crew swaps, it's managing weather situations. And if we can leverage AI through predictive analysis, I think we'll find it'll be a much more powerful tool and give the industry this. I think it'll literally, it's not exactly a discovery of fire, but it's probably pretty close. And it's going to change the way the industry works. So let me give you kind of an overlay of what I'm talking about. I've broken it down into 3 pieces. And I've used some names for it. None of this exists yet, but the idea is sound, I think. And we're going to open this up to questions afterwards. So if you have opinions on what I'm saying, I'd love to hear them. But let me start with the overall. So we have three pieces. One I call Wilbur, and that's weather prediction, route analysis, performance computations. Wilbur is there to take our real-time weather, produce highly accurate forecasting models, and use that as a predictive analysis tool to see how our operation is going to handle weather. If we knew with a 75% or 80% certainty what a weather event could do to, let's say, our East Coast operation. I'm a domestic US. So the East Coast operation, if we knew with an 80% certainty what this would do, then we could move crews and planes, reschedule maintenance. All these items could be handled so that the weather comes in, and as it's leaving, we just go into the vacuum as it pushes off. That's Wilbur. Wilbur is there to make those predictive analysis of weather and allow us better flexibility to manage weather events. The second one is called Orville. Orville is our operations tool. It's going to handle our crew scheduling. It's going to handle our 117 legalities. It's going to handle fatigue analysis, things that if we had better predictive modeling on, we could manage our crews better. One of the big problems that I've had as a pilot is I'm sitting on reserve all day at the airport reserve. And it's a 2-hour call out. But I'm sitting airport reserve, which is useless. I'm sitting there waiting for an event that might or might not happen. What might be a better predictor is if we know that X percent of crews get fatigued at these times, we would have reserves ready to go for those times, as opposed to having somebody sit a 12-hour shift in an airport crew room getting paid really well to do absolutely nothing. That's money that's going out the door that we're not getting we're not getting anything back. We're preventing a maybe, as opposed to if we had a really good study of when do crews call out, why are they calling out, how do we prevent them from calling out, and then break that down into the component pieces so that we have adequate staffing to cover when the crews are actually calling out. Not if they might, but when they actually do.
But just to mention, interestingly, I came across a figure about this, that the global standby, you call it reserve, usage is 40% only. So 40% of the planned standbys are really used. So you have 60% waste. With predictive models, you can increase it to maybe 80%, but still you have 20% waste. So it's a lot of money on the table, as you are saying.
Right. And I think with the better the predictive modeling, the less waste. So that's Orville. That's its component. Finally, and this will age me a bit, but there's a software that I've called Sargon. Sargon was a chess game back in the old days. I don't know if you all know about it, but Sargon is our strategy modeler, and it's going to take a look at what every other airline is doing, and it's going to take a look at what the markets are doing, and it's going to take a look at what our passengers are doing. So think about if you knew you were able to isolate, let's say, the southeast of the United States, and you knew that your passengers love to go to Tallahassee for homecoming because there is this whole population of people that used to go to Florida State University. And you knew that that happened every single year at this time. You'd probably want to be able to cash in on some of that business by having more flights going into Tallahassee around homecoming time, or in my case, the University of Mississippi. So Ole Miss, big football teams. Um, they have the Mississippi State and uh, Ole Miss game called the Egg Bowl, and it's played in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, fans from all over the country who are Ole Miss fans or Mississippi State fans go to Jackson, Mississippi. Now, let's just say hypothetically, this was a huge market, and we could predict when the bookings start and then analyze what all the competition is doing. Maybe nobody pays attention to it. Fine, this is now our niche. And we add more flights at that time to handle going into from several different places, points on the map, to Jackson, Mississippi, that particular week. So Sargon is our strategy planner. It gives us the ability to analyze the patterns across the industry, also across different markets. If we understood that, one of the big problems I've found in the airline business is it's very cyclical. It's going up and it's going down. It's going up and it's going down. It kind of mirrors the economy, but not really. What we could do is narrow the peaks and troughs closer to the flat line. And again, we're not paying for additional resources that we're not using. We've narrowed down our operational environment, and we have better control over how the peaks and troughs of the economy affect us. We don't furlough a bunch of guys and then have to bring them back and have the additional cost of training 6 months or 8 months later when we don't have to, because we've planned our hiring, we've planned our training models. We know far enough in advance what the economy's doing that we can stay ahead of it. And again, this is pattern analysis. It's things that AI does really well that humans aren't. We're not really. We have pattern recognition. We don't really have good analysis tools. This is where we leverage the artificial intelligence, and this is where I think the technology is going. It's going to create airlines, and there'll only be a couple that'll pick up on this. I think Daniel was right on this. There may be 5 or 7 airlines around the world that figure this out really quick and start building tools of their own, not tools that are out there on the market, but tools in-house, and put those tools to work so that they can exploit the tremendous lifting power of what AI can do. And that's kind of what I see the future going to. It creates a better environment for your crews because your crews are not being worn down with because they're flown right to the legal limit. It creates a better environment for your operations staff because they're not being worn down right to the limit. And it gives you a much better control of costs because we know far enough in advance that we can keep the distance between the peaks and the troughs tighter. Therefore, we're not in extremis. A big event happens, computer outages happen, air traffic control outages happen. But if we knew, because it doesn't just happen in 30 seconds, it's hours ahead. If we know hours ahead of an event, we're not predicting the future per se. We're using statistical modeling and predictive analysis, just like intelligence services do, if you will, that we could stay just far enough ahead of the events that we're not having to play catch up. And that was the biggest thing that I found in operations. We're constantly having to play catch up. We're reacting as opposed to acting. And the key, I think, is by leveraging the AI modeling capabilities, we can act. And, someone very wise once said, a good plan implemented immediately is better than a perfect plan never implemented at all. So I'd rather have a stack of really good plans that we're maybe having to modify in real time to handle, the variables inside the environment. But we've gotten to a point where we can use our tools productively and reduce, like I said, reduce the peaks and troughs. And that's the key. If we reduce the peaks and troughs, what happens? We create a more human-centered environment. Why? Because we're treating our people with respect and kindness, which they desperately need. We're treating our passengers exactly like what they are, the valued customers. The guy that rolls up in a Lexus or a Mercedes doesn't want to be treated like cattle. They don't. They want to be treated like they're treated everywhere else in society. And those people, and this is maybe more kind of the ugly American truth, but right now, those people are the people who can afford tickets. So if we treat the people in the business as human beings and we treat our customers as valued customers, then that is, I think, the key. And I believe, quite honestly, AI is the tool set that will help us do that. And I'd love to hear how you all think about it and what your opinions might be and what questions you might have for me.
So I agree. On the other hand, AI is not the solution to everything. Because if you cannot articulate what you need, you cannot translate it into AI. So my experience is, while talking with people about AI and what they want to automate and what they want to support with it, they have really challenges to formulate it. And this is a little bit my concern. If we are now putting AI as the holy grail, let's say 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was always optimization, recovery as the holy grail. And I was just posting Lavanya Mala's talk, which we had in June this year, which was exactly confirming what you say. It's better to implement a good plan than waiting to implement the perfect plan, because that's exactly, in fact, the best explanation. What's the difference between AI and OR, or optimization? So many people mix it. Many people believe AI is optimization, which it is not the case. So my concern is that now everybody is waiting for the perfect AI solution and an excuse not to implement something fast. Unfortunately, many of you have missed Fernando's talk. I still have the recording, but it was deleted from YouTube. But he said what he is doing in British Airways, and I asked, okay, which are the 3 recommendations you would give to other airlines? He said, just do it. Do it now. Do it quick, fail fast, improve what needed, but don't wait too long. So that's why I totally agree with your statement. But on the other hand, I think many, many people in the industry who don't want to change anything, they will take AI as an excuse not to move anywhere.
Right.
But I remember very well our remote ops why not conversation, where 34 minutes we only had positive comments, and then Raquel broke the Raquel, the stage is yours. Raquel broke the positivity and came with the first negative comment. So now, what is Raquel saying on AI? Yeah, muted.
Yeah,
Raquel.
sorry to break your dreams, Daniel. Now maybe, I think that and we have started here at Biba to work on an internal tool also, still not with the AI part, but trying to predict. And I do believe that, well, first, I think that the waste on standbys or reserves It's not something that we're gonna eliminate. We are going to always have waste. Second, I will say that maybe AI could help us to predict a part of what we try to cover by having standbys. So maybe weather, behavior on special dates, etc. I think that AI could help great on at least be certain on that part. But I do think that, for example, here, I mean, and whether not all of it, for example, here in Mexico, we have been having a difficult December, and we have had Tijuana closed for now almost a week every day. And this is not normal. Like usually will be maybe only 3 consecutive days. So now we have had like a really tough week and stuff like that. Maybe you can predict. And maybe most importantly for some of the airlines, and I think it has happened with um, different like engine providers or aircraft providers. We have at this moment like 30 aircraft grounded because of the Pratt and Whitney engine issues.
Right.
How can we predict that? And with this engine topic, we have an idea that at X cycle, the engines we have to stop them, but we have some engines that stop working even before that amount of cycles. So I do think that there is always going to be uncertainty on some topics that we try to cover with standbys. And for example, in my current experience and also in my previous lives, as I usually say, like in the OCC, you try to have at least one crew per like time frame just to ensure that whatever happens, you can try to have a crew to solve the operation. So I do think it will be helpful. I do not think that it will cover enough to say that we can reduce a lot of the standby waste that we have.
Well, I'm like everything, I'm 80-20 on it. I think as far as weather goes and unforeseen weather events, with AI, because you can collect so much data and process it so much faster than it's capable for humans to do, it might. Now, I don't know where the state of the art technology is right this second, but given what tools are currently available, I think that it is within the realm of possibility that certainly for anything that has large amounts of data that needs to be crunched, and again, and Daniel did have a point. The prompt modeling, being able to ask the genie, if you will, for the right wish. You know, I want $1 million is great, but do you want $1 million in ones, or would you like $1 million in gold, which is much smaller, or would you like, you know, a credit card with $1 million limit? You know, what is the tool that you are looking for, right? So knowing how to ask that, or build the prompt that creates the tool, that's where the upward limit is, I think, right now. So it's not just like this free form, let it loose and it'll eat the data and poof, give you magic. It's not that. It's a tool, just like a hammer or a screwdriver. That being said, as far as the crewing situation, I do think that, again, you know, if we by narrowing the peaks and troughs of variability, we can tighten up the the space that we're going to need crews to cover. If we know and have a better grip on what is causing fatigue and preventing that, then we can also outplan it, I guess is where I'm trying to go. And I think AI can help with that. Now, as far as the Pratt & Whitney thing, that's a whole different situation. And had Pratt & Whitney been more honest about what their geared turbofans were doing with the rest of the industry and not trying to sell this brand new flash product, I think we would probably not be having that same issue that we have now. That's a manufacturer thing. That's like the Boeing Max 8s. Same thing. If people had known about that software in there, the Max software, they probably would have said, "Hey, maybe we ought to have training on that." Which, by the way, now they do. But the key here, and I apologize for the background noise if y'all can hear it. It's the groundskeepers out there going to town.
No, we can't. You're
okay,
good.
But the key here is that, once again, specifically with that, that was a manufacturer situation. But if we know that there's a mean time between failure, and again, we can predict about when these components fail, then we can model our operation based on that prediction. And if it happens sooner or later, then we tighten up the model. That's the key, is rather than have a bunch of guys sitting there throwing darts at a board trying to figure it out, we have a tool that can that's designed to handle that sort of thing. Take this large amount of data, crunch it down into a more human-sized piece, and say, here it is. This is now the new tool or the new information. Make of it what you will. So if we know, for example, that the mean time between failures 2,000 hours of a component, then we know that if it happened at 1,800 hours and another one happened at 2,100 hours, then we know where the envelope is. And we know that, okay, well, 2,000 hours is probably a good guess. And that's all we're doing, is we're just making better guesses. I'm not saying that this is going to change the world per se, but by having better guesses, it makes the intellectual lifting that we have to do with our simple monkey brains way easier. And if that makes the lives of our operations staff easier, then it's worth the investment, I guess is where
you lift both lives. You are pilot, so up in the air in the cockpit, very much technology driven, very much data driven, and you managed an OCC or SOC. So when you have to forecast now where AI will come in first, will it be in the cockpit? How is the reaction from pilots on this technology? How is technology innovation somehow driven? Is it that pilots try to defend paperwork because they see technology as a threat, or are they asking for better technology in order to be released from routine tasks? And how is it in the SOC? What is your experience there?
So from the pilot's point of view, and I always say this, if I wanted to work for a living, I wouldn't be a pilot. Pilots are essentially what I consider exemplars of applied sloth. They would prefer not to do anything other than fly the airplane and look good at doing it. The reality is, the technology, the more the technology comes in, they usually go, oh, great, here's another piece of stuff that doesn't work. And usually it's not stuff, it's something else. It's another expletive. But
So you mean they really want to fly themselves, not push the autopilot?
Oh no, autopilot's great.
Yeah,
But I
it's
would
technology.
say,
It's
right,
technology.
but I would say, from a pilot's point of view, it's not. They're not intimidated by what we're doing in the OCC. They just need some more transparency on it. They need to understand how crew schedulers came up with this really crappy schedule, because that's usually the thing that I get. If when I was jump seating as a dispatcher, it wasn't anything that I did as a dispatcher they had a problem with. Yeah, we need more fuel. That was always a big thing. Yeah, we want more fuel. Okay. The thing that really ground gears was what crew scheduling was doing. They're either not, paying attention to the contract, or interpreting the contract via whatever, or, they're flying us right to the legal limit, and then, we're exhausted. We have to call fatigue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from the pilot's point of view, technology is okay. But I don't see AI, especially in the United States, I don't see AI getting into the cockpit for another 20, 30 years, just because you got to go through the FAA, and these people are still using, vacuum tube technology. My interactions with the FAA technologically, and this was a few years back when I was over at Global Crossing, these guys, they might have used like Windows, 95 computers. They were not tuned in to where the technology was with NavBlue, or what we could do with the weather forecasting models and stuff like that. They're like, oh wow, this is like, never seen any of this before. And I'm like, bro, this is basic stuff. What do you mean you've never seen this? This is industry standard. This is what everybody uses. Oh yeah, well, we've never seen it before. And I'm just like, wait, you're a dispatch inspector and you've never seen this? Yeah, and that was really what rankled my feathers, is they had to have a meeting about it. So when we're talking AI implementation in the United States in the cockpit, I'm going to be long gone and dead before that shows.
But I have an idea why we are not renaming then the FAA into FAAI, and maybe then they come closer to AI.
And now because then it's a 4-letter acronym, and that would just blow their minds. They can't deal with it. It's 1 letter too many. But let's look at what happens in the OCC. And I think the OCC is where you'll see more AI implementation, because it takes. So my wife is a dispatcher at Southwest, and on a busy day she has maybe 20, 30 flights, which is pretty good for a 121 major carrier in the United States. Southwest operates over 4,000 flights a day. They're the one aircraft type. They're 737s. They've got 700s, 800s, and MAX 8s. And it's pretty broad. They go across the United States. They go into, I think, Canada. They go into the Caribbean, some points in Central America, and Hawaii. So they got some ETOPS operations. They got some international operations. So they move around the board pretty good. They have transcons from coast to coast. So, but I can see the AI working there again more in the Wilbur version, where it's handling weather and pattern recognition of what delays look like, cascading delays in various regions. So,
but they have the famous baker. You don't know the baker?
The what?
The baker.
The bacon?
The baker. The baker.
No.
Ask your wife whether she knows the baker. It's an in-house tool from Southwest. I think they announced this potentially 10 years ago, and it's also like disruption recovery, and then potentially they are also using AI for that to
Yes.
reroute flights if there is something blah blah blah. And
Yeah, no, it doesn't. They went to flight keys, and the implementation was spotty at best. It was not very good. They kind of just jumped in with both feet. I liken it to how I learned how to swim. When I was real little, my mom took us to the country club, and the swim instructors threw me in the deep end of the pool. And as I'm drowning, basically, I figured out, oh, wait a second, I can doggy paddle and get off to the side. And of course, the swim instructor says, well, he's drown proof now. And, and so that's kind of the situation they did. They just implemented it. Good luck. They gave him some training on it. Now you're an expert. And that's not, and I can see you shaking your head like, no, this is not really the way it should work. But that's what they did. Where I was working at Envoy, they did the same thing. They implemented it. Pilots went nuts because the releases didn't look anything like the old releases. The fuel was too low or too high. Nothing had been optimized or set up. It was, they just dumped the database into the new software and hoped that you'd get a result. And they'd been testing it in a vacuum, in a sandbox, hoping that they'd get this result of something that worked. And it was a mess. And again, that's why I think AI can, again, AI is not the panacea. It's a tool. Like I said, it's a hammer or a screwdriver. It's a tool. It is not going to be the solution to every problem, but it can get rid of a lot of the static that is preventing us from making the right decisions. So
but is the root cause of all the problems not that all these American carriers have mainframe legacy systems from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? And that's always my metaphor. If I'm telling you, I went to the US in September 2007, carried 4 devices, my cell phone, my digital camera, my PSP, and my Garmin navigation system, 4 chargers, 4 sets of cables. And if I have to describe how to take a picture sending it home by email, process is very complicated. And if I try to do AI in order to speed it up, AI would be very limited. I take a smartphone where AI is part of the solution meanwhile, because we have autocorrection now, we have all the apps helping us. So that's why you can put the fanciest AI tool on top of this legacy IT, and your AI will never evolve. And that's why, again, AI will not be the solution to everything. And that's my concern. I think all the major airlines in the US need to replace finally their systems from last century. Some of them are older than me. So the world record holder is from 64. Yeah, so I think your father was working on this Unimatic system. You cannot do AI on this piece. So that's why that's always my advice. Don't hope to put a foxtail on the antenna of your slow car and that you can appear very fast. It will not float in the wind. It will not float.
So really quick, in the case of American Airlines and its wholly owned subsidiaries, everybody that patches into American goes into Sabre, or DEX, as they call it. And it's a monochrome display. It is old, kludged out. It is held together with spit and baling wire. And there are a bunch of guys in the basement over here at the headquarters in Dallas who know the Fortran code for this or that or the other. And it's ancient. It is, they were using Sabre before men landed on the moon. This is literally so old that they have to call guys who have retired and hopefully haven't died
But wait, we have someone here in the call, Nadia. You can jump in. So which program language do you have to master? Because she is working for American Airlines.
Okay, Nadia, please.
Yes. Are you talking about the scheduling one? Because you also talked about the flight planning. We have flight keys as well.
Yeah, you have flight keys and you have decks, and I guess decks is kind of like the main scheduling hub for everything. It used to be that decks handled all the flight planning as well, but
Yeah, but I would say on the scheduling side, it's still antiquated. There's some work I tried basically to implement. So basically they could click and drag, if you need to replace a crew, you click and drag. Well, I was resisting, how to say it, some, of opinions. Although the crew people really, really wanted that. So today I would say on the crew side, if we limit it on the crew side, yes, there's a lot of ways to go. Not on the dispatch side, but on the crew side.
right. And that was but it was something that I constantly bumped up against, because anytime there was a change to the schedule, or I had to get a crew room, or I had to arrange for space available seating, or a positive space business seat, I had to go through decks, and it was this multi-character code that was very nuanced, and you're just like, wait a second, there's a better way to do this. There has to be a better way. And that was I think where the genesis for all this came was, if I'm frustrated with it, and I'm not exactly elite hacker guy, but I've been around computers most of my life, and I'm frustrated. How about Billy Joe Bob, who's wearing cowboy boots, talks like this? Man, I don't know nothing about them computers. Man, I know how to fly an airplane. And he's his eyes are crossed. He has no idea what he's looking at. And I sense the frustration. I've flown with older guys older than me, and they're like, man, I don't know what the hell this is doing. Why did the plane do that? I have no idea. It just did. And or maybe we might want to either turn off the autopilot, fly the airplane, or figure out why it just did that. Don't you think would be good? But anyhow, that's.
But just one thing. So there's a big initiatives going on, and one of the aspects is to take some components out of force, and crew is kind of a priority number one.
Yeah.
So where it's going, we'll see. But
Well,
that's
Nadia, which year is it? Will it be before 2030 or before 2040, or when do you believe will it be ready?
They had a very aggressive plan, which I don't think is realistic. So I don't know if I should say the years in case other people hear that, but no, they really think it would be before 2030, which could be. 3 years was too aggressive. I mean, just on the crew side. But there's a lot of components like load planning as well is still very crunching. And, the business has been asking for years and years and each time we were about finding a vendor, then funding was not there, over priority. So load planning is kind of in the same boat. And the expectation is probably going to be 4 to 5 years to implement a new load planning system out of force.
And you have still enough developers who know the program language of your FOSS system?
Depends on the area. On the load planning, no. We always wonder if a guy decide to retire, what do we do? On the crew side, there's a bit more. I mean, of course, not that many, but there's a bit more. But it's limited. Limited staffing.
Because it's like Sanskrit or hieroglyphics. It's an ancient language that nobody speaks, or Latin. It's an ancient language that nobody speaks, and it's this is one of the big problems. And Daniel, you're right in saying this. The legacy systems, because of the huge capital outlay and investment at the time, they had to keep patching and patching and patching and patching because they just, again, peaks and troughs. The money just wasn't there. Airplanes cost more money than computers do now. But it was really all about, these gigantic computers in some building somewhere that the people that ran the airlines, the original guys, you could go to C.R. Smith and say, hey man, we got this box and it has this electronic stuff in it and it does this. And he'd look at you like you were a moron. He said, what, we can't get guys with pencils and graph paper and slide rules? It works. It's worked all this time. Why can't it do now? Right? So they implemented computer technology because it actually reduced the number of people that they needed. Because before that, you had to have a lot of people to calculate stuff. Well, now these old software products have been patched and kludged and glued and super glued and bonded and pasted over. And so one point of failure and the whole thing comes undone. I was at PSA. We had a computer failure. It cost the company, at the time, we were down for a week and it cost them $20 million. And this was before COVID. So 2017, 2018, we had this computer outage and it was devastating. It was so bad that we stopped flying. I told everybody, stop flying now. Planes, stay at the gate, do not move because we can't track you. We would be operating illegally if you were in the air. And then we had to call AA, American Airlines Operations, have them track our planes for us so that they could at least get to the outstations or get back to the hub, because we lost all our software. Everything was gone. I had to have one chief pilot run to the end of Echo Concourse in Charlotte and the other chief pilot run to the other end of Echo Concourse, taking numbers down on a pad with a pencil of what planes were actually at the gate because we couldn't track it. That is the worst computer failure I've ever seen. And I saw it 3 days before. We were having cascade failures on the servers. And I was like, I walked into my boss's office and I said, hey, boss, I got good news and bad news. Good news is I know what's going to happen. Bad news is we're going to have a cascade failure here if we don't do something. And he's like, oh, you're being an alarmist. And I'm like, no, the servers are dropping offline. They're coming back up, but there's something wrong here. And he's like, well, whatever. I don't pay you for that. Okay, well, I don't know what I know. And I come back, I go off for a couple of days. I come back on duty and we have the biggest single failure of a regional carrier up to that point. And since then, there have been others, that have been worse, but that was huge. And it was so bad that the CIO of American came in and apologized. She actually stood up in front of the whole OCC, said, I am so sorry. We should have upgraded your system sooner. And I'm like, well, yeah, that did not, that could have been, a year ago, we could have done this. We'd have never had that problem and probably saved us $15 million.
So I'm always asking myself, who is benefiting from this entire situation with these IT dinosaurs and what you were just saying, and there's a lot of hope and potentially, and religion is strong in the US, the churches, because you have to send prayers every day that your IT system is still making it next day. And church is very strong maybe they are somehow having their influential hands, that IT is not changed, because then you have no hope and prayers anymore, because suddenly everything is working. So maybe it's speculation, but maybe they play a role in this.
Well, so I have an iPhone here, and arguably it is way more powerful computer than any computer I've ever used up to this point. And one of the things I've learned about Apple is that everything works until something really hard breaks, and then you just throw it away and get a new one. But for what it is, and by the way, I'm using my iPad here to have this conversation with you all. For what it is, it's fantastic. At one point, I was working in IT as a computer tech, building computers, networks, things like that. And when the iPad came out, I realized my day as a computer tech was over, because if I had something that was at least as powerful as a laptop for 90% of the people, because we get on, we look at the YouTube videos, we look at whatever movie services we're streaming, and we're getting our email. That's it. You're going to check. It's what my dad uses his computer for. He checks his email. He goes, takes care of some banking with it, and he watches YouTube videos. That's it. And then he has streaming services to his TV. That's all he does. 90% of the people in the United States, that's what they do. There's that 10% that are power users, and they need, stuff to launch space probes and whatever. But the reality is that these computers, these tablets, these phones, the one thing that I've learned is they always work. I turn it on and it works. That's it. That's all you want. You want that from your airplane, and you want that from your operation. Your operation should be a 24/7, 365, and it always works. There should not be a point of failure. Now, things heat up, they break, it happens. Somebody spills coffee. Stuff happens. But in our business, because we have the lives of people attached to it, we want it to work all the time. And we want to minimize the points of failure. And I think, and like, as I've seen a couple of comments so far, AI is not the solution. It's not the absolute solution. And once again, like it's the genie. If you ask it the right question the right way, you will get the right answer. But it is a very powerful tool that we have got to start looking at implementing into the industry. And I don't know whether it'll ever get to the cockpit, but I know it will definitely be in the OCC, and I know it will definitely make people's jobs easier. Computationally, you'll have more power. You're going to need better computers, but I think the cost of acquisition of decent computers right now is getting lower and lower and lower. I remember once upon a time, a computer was this crazy expensive, gigantic thing, and it needed rooms and air conditioning. And, my grandfather was an engineer, and he had his own engineering company. They built parts for other machines. So they used tool and die, and they would make other machine parts. He had one of the first computers in New Haven, Connecticut. And it was a huge article. This is 1950 something or other. And it talked about it had the largest air conditioner at the time for a commercial facility. Why? Because this computer put out so much heat. Why? Because it was vacuum tubes. And It was this numerical computer that did basically what a desktop CNC machine can do today. And that's where the airlines are right now. They're still back there in the 1950s. And the future is where they need to start moving towards. And the technology investment right now has never been lower and will continue to drop off. The power that we have in our hands every day and the power that is available computationally, it should be a wash. It's the technology investment that, Daniel, and you're right, it's technology investment they've been avoiding. But I think that as AI filters into the enterprise environment, the airlines will, and more to your point, I think when you said, there's 5 to 7 airlines that will get this and upgrade and make the jump, and then everybody else will just be playing, oh, we have AI products, and they don't work because it's just another layer of goo stacked on top of multiple layers of paint, if you will. They just keep painting over the problem, and you got layers of paint and a little thin sheet of metal, but it's all held together with layers of paint, and that's just what the AI layer is going to be. This another layer of paint at the top. Oh, look, it's shiny. Great, but it doesn't work because look what you're stacked on top of.
And one idea from me, if you talk with somebody from the union, I think AI is a huge opportunity for the union to take over this topic for their members, because it reminds me a bit here in Berlin a couple of years back. Every taxi driver did everything to tell me how dangerous Uber is, because
Right.
they tried to avoid, and Uber is there. So you cannot avoid AI by telling people this will not work and blah, 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 blah. So my suggestion is the union should agree with the airline management that their members get, for a period of time, 5 years, 10 times, kind of an financed pension scheme from the cost savings coming from AI in the operations. It's a win-win-win situation, because if the union is not doing anything, AI will of course replace people, but it's still time for the union to have an agreement in place, because at the moment all these experts in the SOC doing the decision, doing it manually, their brain power can train the model, they can leave a legacy, and this might be the incentive for all these experts to speed it up and to get their additional payment earlier and stay at the beach and serve on their cocktail instead of working with the legacy IT and the SOC. Maybe an idea if you talk with somebody from the union.
Well, if you're talking about the dispatch union, I would agree. Our crew schedulers don't have unions here in the United States. They're a separate craft. So they're not represented by the TWU. As far as pilots, the pilots, I think they would see it as, as long as it makes my life easier, I don't care. And, I think from the pilot's perspective, their fear is AI implementation in the cockpit. My dad likes to tell, because my dad's an airline pilot, and he likes to tell, one day they're just going to have a pilot and a dog, and the dog bites the hand of the pilot when he touches the autopilot off switch. And when my dad started flying, there were 4 guys in the cockpit. You had a navigator, an engineer, and both of those were professional. That was what they did. They never touched the control of the airplane. And then you had a first officer and captain. When my dad started at United, you had a flight engineer, second officer, who was also a certificated commercial pilot. And eventually he upgraded to first officer and then upgraded to captain, because that's how the contract worked. Now we only have 2 pilot aircraft. In Europe, the predominant aircraft is the Airbus. In the United States, predominant aircraft is Boeing. Although I'm seeing a narrowing number of Airbus to Boeing ratio. And they have their pluses and minuses, but the key here is that AI for these guys is they're more interested in using ChatGPT to make dirty pictures than they are really. And I'm being totally honest. They're more interested in stuff like that than they are actually thinking in terms of, oh, this is a tool that will change my life. And like I said, I don't see AI entering the cockpit till 2050, maybe, by the time they've got it to a point where the crews can, or crews could use it, and it is FAA certified. And I think that's kind of where that goes.
David, a big thank you for this conversation. I have to admit, it was beyond my imagination. First of all, it's also a great proof point, again, for my colleague, Mr. Jones, who is always speaking against PowerPoint, because you have so many PowerPoint-based presentations, it's boring, and you were not showing anything. It's a lively conversation and from an expert, and fantastic. And also all the insights you shared, especially also your mindset, your passion. I loved it very much. I learned a lot. I'm sure this will be not our last conversation. Please spread the word about Airline Crewing Enigma. The good news is we will kick off next year with somebody who is also working with FAA. So we will see what Shweta is telling us about her experiences with FAA. We will then also talk about happiness and corporate well-being. Somebody from the European Commission working on the human factor in aviation, formerly being an air traffic controller. And then we will also talk about a former SOC manager who is now very strong in AI, and who really, it was spot on when he said you can only automate with AI what you can articulate. So we have a full program already till spring next year. Lovely to have you all today in this Airline Crewing Enigma. Until we see each other again, please stay healthy. And if you know somebody who is smart, upbeat, positive, and enthusiastic, spread the word. They can join us. I wish everybody Merry Christmas and a very healthy and successful New Year, and looking forward to hearing from you soon again. Thank you, David. Thank you.
You're welcome, and y'all have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.